What if everything we know about Hitler's death is wrong? What if the most hated man in history did not die in that Berlin bunker? No confirmed body, no public proof, just smoke, fire, and silence. As the world celebrated the fall of the Nazi regime, a trail of secrets began. The official story said he shot himself, swallowed poison, that his body was burned with Eva Braun's. Eyewitnesses inside the bunker swore it was true. British intelligence backed it. Soviet soldiers claimed they found dental remains, but doubts never died. The body was never shown. Stalin stayed silent. And then whispers, submarines, Argentina, secret files, FBI documents marked classified, hidden for decades. Could Hitler have escaped? Could the most hunted man in modern history have walked free? In today's video, we dig deep into testimonies, intelligence, and forensic clues to uncover whether Hitler died in that bunker or disappeared into history's shadows. Chapter 1, the official account, Hitler's death in the bunker. By late April 1945, the once mighty capital of the Third Reich had become a shattered graveyard of crumbling buildings and choking smoke. Soviet artillery thundered closer each hour, and the Red Army had surrounded the city like a noose. Inside the Führer bunker, 28 feet below the streets, Adolf Hitler, the dictator who had plunged the world into chaos, faced the end. But there would be no final battle, no defiant last stand. What unfolded in those claustrophobic rooms beneath the Reich Chancellery would become one of the most examined and debated deaths in modern history. Hitler, now physically frail and mentally exhausted, had retreated into isolation. His face was gaunt, his hands trembled. His war was over. The German army had all but collapsed. His allies were dead or captured, and the city around him lay in ruins. Surrounded by his last loyal followers, valets, secretaries, generals, he prepared for what he called his final duty. This is where the official story begins. A suicide, a burning body, and a handful of witnesses. But it is also where the questions start, because while the facts seem simple, the mystery would never fully fade. On April 29, 1945, with Soviet shells echoing above, Hitler summoned his closest aides and dictated two documents, a personal will and a political testament. These writings dripped with defiance. He blamed the Jews, the generals, and the Allied powers for Germany's downfall. That same night in the dim bunker corridor, he married Eva Braun. After more than a decade by his side, she would follow him into death less than 24 hours later. By the morning of April 30th, Hitler had made up his mind. There would be no surrender. Captivity, especially at the hands of Stalin's forces, was unthinkable. He had seen what had been done to Mussolini's corpse. That would not be his fate. He took a final lunch with his inner circle. Eyewitnesses described the mood as quiet, almost numb. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, Hitler and Eva withdrew to his private study. The door was closed. A few minutes later, a sharp crack echoed through the concrete halls. When Hitler's valet, Heinz Linger, and SS adjutant Otto Günsche opened the door, they found Hitler lifeless on the couch, blood pooling beneath his head. He had shot himself in the right temple with a 7.65 millimeter Walther pistol. Eva lay beside him, lips blue from the cyanide capsule she had taken. On a nearby table sat his personal revolver, untouched. What came next was carried out swiftly and in silence. Earlier that day, Hitler had ordered that his body be burned so it could not be displayed or desecrated. Günsche and Linger wrapped both corpses in a blanket, carried them up the narrow staircase and out into the blasted courtyard behind the Reich Chancellery. The area was a cratered mess of rubble and broken brick. There, in a shallow shell hole, the bodies were laid down. Gallons of gasoline were poured over them, and the pyre was lit. The flames rose quickly, but the destruction was incomplete. Shells continued to fall nearby as Hitler's most loyal followers watched the fire consume their leader's remains. There were no prayers, no words, just the crackling of flames and the end of an empire. Later, the remains were buried in the same crater, hastily covered with dirt and debris. The bunker door was sealed. What was left behind would become both a historical artifact and a source of endless conspiracy. In the aftermath of the war, the Allies launched a massive effort to confirm Hitler's death. British intelligence, led by historian and intelligence officer Hugh Trevor Roper, conducted dozens of interviews with bunker survivors. Heinz Linger, Otto Günsche, secretaries Traudl Junge, and Gerda Christian, and others, all gave detailed, consistent testimony. Their recollections painted a clear picture of Hitler's final days. They described his physical decline, his erratic behavior, his obsession with control, even over death. Linger confirmed that Hitler's jaw and part of his skull had been visible before the fire took hold. Günsche explained how he had personally overseen the cremation. Junge and Christian described Hitler's last conversations and farewells. Even Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann acknowledged the suicide before meeting their own ends. Their stories varied slightly in minor details, who was in the room, what time the shot was fired, but the overall timeline aligned. Hitler had died on April 30th, 1945 by his own hand, and he had intended for no one to ever find his body intact. Trevor Roper compiled his findings into the book The Last Days of Hitler in 1947. It was based on direct interviews, captured German documents, and Soviet reports. The conclusion was clear. Hitler had committed suicide, and his remains had been burned and buried. When Soviet forces finally stormed the Chancellery on May 2, 1945, they quickly located the entrance to the bunker. What they found inside confirmed the chaos of the regime's final hours. Abandoned rooms, scattered belongings, and hastily written documents. Near the garden, buried in a shallow grave, Soviet soldiers uncovered charred remains. Among them was a jawbone fragment and part of a skull. The jaw contained dental bridges and gold crowns. The Soviets sent it for analysis, but this is where the story took a strange turn. Instead of publicly confirming Hitler's death, Stalin ordered secrecy. He even told American officials that Hitler may have escaped. This contradictory behavior confused Allied leaders and led to widespread speculation. Internally, the Soviets had actually done their homework. They interrogated Hitler's dental staff. Kata Heusermann and Fritz Echtmann, under pressure, both confirmed that the jaw matched Hitler's dental records. The work was distinctive and unmistakable, but this confirmation remained hidden for decades. The remains were quietly buried in Magdeburg in 1946 under the supervision of the KGB. In 1970, fearing the gravesite might be discovered, the Soviets exhumed the remains, cremated them, and scattered the ashes in the Elbe River. Only the jawbone and skull fragment were preserved and stored away in a Russian archive. Why didn't the Soviets simply announce Hitler's death? Why fan the flames of mystery? Some historians believe Stalin enjoyed keeping the West guessing. Others suggest he wanted to blame Western powers for possibly helping Hitler escape. Whatever the reason, the Soviet Union's refusal to confirm the findings publicly created a vacuum, one soon filled with rumors. Adding to the confusion, no photograph of Hitler's corpse was ever released. Unlike Mussolini or other Nazi leaders, the world never saw his dead body. For some, this absence became proof that something had been hidden. To the public, it appeared that Hitler had vanished into thin air. And in that fog of uncertainty, alternative theories began to thrive. The combined evidence, the eyewitness accounts, the recovered remains, and the dental identification, forms the foundation of the official account. Nearly every historian who has studied the last days of the Third Reich accepts the conclusion Hitler died on April 30th, 1945, in his bunker beneath Berlin. His last words were spoken to his staff just hours before. It is finished, goodbye. The silence that followed that gunshot echoed through history. But for all the certainty in the official files, mystery still lingered. Secrecy, miscommunication, and the Cold War atmosphere made it easy for doubt to take root, and once it did, it never left. Chapter 2, The Missing Body and Soviet Secrecy. But that was not all. While the official narrative of Hitler's death seemed airtight, witnesses, dental records, and final goodbyes, the aftermath raised disturbing new questions. And those questions began not in Berlin, but deep behind the Iron Curtain, where silence, secrecy, and state propaganda blurred the line between truth and myth. The body that was supposed to end the story of Adolf Hitler instead became its greatest mystery. On May 2, 1945, Soviet forces reported the capture of the Reich Chancellery and Hitler's bunker. A few days later, they announced they had discovered charred remains in a shallow crater outside the Führer bunker, just as described by captured German aides. Yet soon after, Stalin did something puzzling. Instead of confirming Hitler's death publicly, he issued a gag order. Any mention of the body, any confirmation of suicide was strictly off limits. The remains, allegedly Hitler's, were whisked away not to a public forensic lab or international tribunal, but to a Soviet military compound. Their very existence became a state secret. Why? Officially, Stalin feared that Hitler's death would allow the Western Allies to relax, demobilize, or even stop pursuing Nazi remnants. Behind the scenes, something darker brewed. Stalin personally told U.S. Secretary of State James Burns at the Potsdam Conference that Hitler may have escaped. Soviet press began to circulate rumors Hitler had fled in a submarine, escaped to Spain, or vanished into South America. Moscow's intelligence services, the NKVD, and later the KGB, actively encouraged the idea that the Western Allies might be shielding him. It was the beginning of Operation Myth. This Soviet disinformation campaign cast deliberate doubt on the events of April 30th, 1945. By controlling the only physical evidence, the body, and manipulating what was released to the world, Stalin ensured that uncertainty would linger. For years, the Western world had no access to Hitler's remains or any forensic proof. The vacuum was filled with suspicion, conspiracy theories, and denials. According to declassified Soviet records, the Red Army had recovered what it believed to be Hitler's corpse, badly burned but identifiable. These remains were taken first to Buk, a Soviet field hospital, and then to a military facility in Magdeburg. There, in a small unmarked grave beneath a Soviet army base, the body rested for decades, hidden from the world. Only a select few within Soviet intelligence knew of the burial, and no independent experts were ever allowed access. Then, in 1970, a strange and final act occurred. The Soviet military, preparing to hand over the base in Magdeburg to East German authorities, decided the body could not be left behind. On KGB orders, a small team secretly exhumed the remains, reportedly including the bodies of Hitler, Eva Braun, and the Goebbels children. They were burned once more. The ashes were gathered and scattered in the Biederitz River, a quiet tributary outside the city. No trace was left, no gravestone, no coffin, no physical proof. All that remained were two fragments, part of a jawbone and a small piece of skull. But even these would prove controversial. In the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Russian government began to declassify old archives. For the first time, Western historians gained access to long-secret KGB documents and a few surviving relics, including the jaw fragment and the skull piece. Moscow claimed these were the definitive remains of Adolf Hitler. At first, many believed it. The jawbone was indeed a powerful artifact. In 1945, Hitler's dentist and dental assistant had described his unusual dental bridges and gold crowns. Soviet investigators had preserved those dental x-rays and compared them with the charred remains. The match was convincing. In fact, even Western historians like Hugh Trevor Roper, working with limited access, concluded that the jaw was authentic and that Hitler had died in the bunker. But then came the skull. In 2000, Russian authorities displayed a partial skull with a bullet hole, said to be Hitler's. For years, it was exhibited in Moscow's State Archive as a grim trophy of victory over Nazism. But in 2009, an American team led by archaeologist Nick Bellantoni obtained permission to DNA test the skull. Their results shook the foundation of the official story. The DNA did not belong to a man, it belonged to a woman. That meant the skull Russia had long claimed to be Adolf Hitler's could not have been his at all. Historians scrambled to explain the discrepancy. Was it Ava Braun's skull instead? That seemed unlikely, as she had taken cyanide and was never shot. Could it have been a random civilian killed nearby, or a misidentified victim from the final bunker chaos? Either way, the damage was done. The most concrete physical proof of Hitler's death, his supposed skull, was now ruled out entirely. The only remaining piece was the jawbone, but even that had never been tested by independent experts. It was a story built on testimony, not science. The result? Doubt. The disappearance of Hitler's body, the destruction of his grave, the suppression of Soviet reports, and the display of a false skull all fed into one chilling question. What if the body burned outside the bunker was not Hitler's at all? That possibility, once dismissed as a fringe conspiracy, now had unsettling weight. Some argued that Hitler had used a double. The chaos of Berlin's fall provided perfect cover. In those last desperate days, thousands were killed. Many burned beyond recognition. Eyewitnesses could be confused, manipulated, or coerced. The Soviets, determined to claim the propaganda prize, may have accepted the wrong body, or simply declared victory before confirming the facts. Others pointed to Stalin's political motives. By fueling rumors of Hitler's escape, he cast suspicion on the Allies and kept global attention on Nazi remnants, particularly those in American custody. Figures like Otto Skorzeny, Martin Bormann, and Josef Mengele vanished after the war, only to resurface years later. If they could disappear, why not Hitler? The truth may never be known, but the Soviet secrecy and the strange tale of the vanishing corpse did one thing for certain. They opened the door to decades of speculation. From Argentina to Antarctica, the legend of Hitler's survival became a global obsession. In the absence of a body, stories grow. And for many, the biggest question still lingered: if it was not his skull and no one ever saw a confirmed autopsy, who was really buried in Magdeburg? Was it Adolf Hitler or someone else? Chapter 3, Eyewitness Reports and Escape Routes. When Hitler's body disappeared behind the Iron Curtain, so did the certainty of his death. What should have been the end of the story became the start of something stranger. A vacuum of truth, soon filled by something much more powerful: speculation. And speculation, like fire in dry grass, spreads faster when fueled by secrecy. In the absence of public evidence, theories flourished. Some were dismissed immediately as nonsense. Others lingered, picking up fragments of circumstantial claims and swirling into more elaborate tales. Before the embers in Berlin's Reich Chancellery garden had cooled, people were already whispering, "What if Hitler got away?" It did not take long for these whispers to echo around the world. In 1948, a Luftwaffe pilot named Peter Baumgart surfaced in Poland. He claimed under interrogation that he had personally flown Hitler from Berlin to Denmark. as the Soviets closed in. According to Baumgart from Denmark, Hitler boarded a U-boat and was never seen again. The details were sparse and contradictory. No ship manifest, no supporting logs, and yet the story was compelling enough to be reported in South American newspapers. What stood out was not Baumgart's reliability, but the world's readiness to listen. More claims began to surface. Some said Hitler had taken a submarine from the Baltic coast to Argentina. Others suggested he had been airlifted out of Berlin in a long-range aircraft during the final days of April. A few even insisted Hitler escaped disguised as a Red Cross worker, smuggled past Allied lines in the chaos of Germany's collapse. One Swiss journalist published a theory in the 1950s that Hitler was living in a Buddhist monastery in Tibet. Another report, just as bizarre, claimed that the Führer had undergone plastic surgery in Barcelona and assumed a new identity in Brazil. The stories spiraled. There were even rumors of a secret Nazi base in Antarctica, where Hitler commanded a breakaway civilization. The farther from Berlin the theories went, the deeper into fantasy they sank. And yet, these stories never died. In 2011, a book titled Grey Wolf, The Escape of Adolf Hitler reignited international debate. Written by British authors Simon Dunstan and Gerard Williams, the book claimed Hitler and Eva Braun fled to Argentina via Spain in a German submarine. There, the story said, they lived under aliases in the foothills of the Andes. The book alleged they had 2 daughters and that Hitler lived until 1962, dying peacefully in his bed. The Grey Wolf authors cited Argentine military files, FBI declassified documents, and interviews with locals in the Patagonian village of San Carlos de Bariloche, a real location known for its post-war German immigrant population. Some witnesses claimed to have met the German couple who never aged. One woman described a stern, mustachioed man who went by the name Uncle Ade. These interviews, though intriguing, were never independently verified. Many locals denied the existence of any Nazi fugitives. Others remained silent. Skeptics were quick to respond. Historians pointed out that nearly every eyewitness account referenced in the book recycled older rumors or third-hand stories. The most basic evidence was missing. No photographs, no documents, no solid proof. And perhaps most tellingly, Grey Wolf offered no credible explanation for how Hitler could have escaped the heavily surrounded bunker, made it past Soviet troops, crossed Europe undetected, and embarked on a sea voyage with Allied forces patrolling the Atlantic. Even the FBI files referenced in Grey Wolf, publicly released under the Freedom of Information Act, contained mostly unsubstantiated tips from civilians with no follow-up investigations that produced meaningful evidence. Some of these memos mentioned Hitler possibly seen in Colombia or living in the Andes, but they were filled with inconsistencies and lacked corroboration. They were kept on file not because they were credible, but because the Bureau cataloged everything, however unlikely. Still, for conspiracy theorists, these scraps were enough. Part of the appeal of such narratives lies not in their believability, but in the questions they raise. What if the Soviets lied? What if the dental evidence was faked? What if the chaos of war masked the perfect escape? Even reputable figures once indulged these questions, at least for a moment. U.S. General Dwight D. Eisenhower admitted in 1945 that he was not convinced of Hitler's death. Stalin himself repeatedly told Western leaders that Hitler had escaped. In fact, during the Potsdam Conference that summer, Stalin insisted Hitler had fled either to Spain or Argentina. Whether this was genuine belief or Cold War gamesmanship is still debated. Soviet disinformation campaigns further muddied the waters. Operation Myth deliberately spread rumors of Hitler's survival to destabilize the West. These rumors leaked into newspapers and books. They were amplified by tabloid writers Cold War defectors, and the occasional intelligence officer looking to sell a story. In this fog of rumor and counter-rumor, the line between truth and fiction blurred. Even Allied investigators like American Judge Michael Musmano, who presided over parts of the Nuremberg trials, found it necessary to publish books debunking the escape theories. In 10 Days to Die, 1950, Musmano concluded firmly that Hitler had died in the Berlin bunker. He interviewed dozens of people who had been there, secretaries, guards, aides, and cross-referenced their accounts. They all told the same story. And yet, Musmano noted how hard it was to fight fantasy with facts. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, journalists, authors, and even intelligence analysts continued to explore the possibility of Hitler's escape. National magazines published speculative articles. Television specials featured ominous voiceovers and grainy photos claiming to show an aging Hitler in exile. These stories were often debunked shortly after airing, but the seed of doubt had already been planted in the minds of millions. In South America, the legends took on a life of their own. In Argentina, Brazil, and Chile, sightings of the Führer became urban folklore. Some locals claimed Hitler lived in a remote estate, guarded by ex-SS men. Others said he was seen shopping for groceries in a small town, still wearing his signature haircut. It was theater, but in areas with large German populations and real histories of Nazi immigration, the theater seemed oddly plausible. The truth, however, never moved. It stayed buried in Berlin, where those who were actually in the Führer bunker repeated the same grim tale. Hitler died by suicide. His body was partially burned. His jawbone and dental remains confirmed his identity. The Soviet Union recovered them, and though they concealed this for decades, the evidence was there. Still, the survival myths endure. Perhaps because people struggle to accept that such a monstrous figure died so quietly. No trial, no justice, just a self-inflicted end in a dark underground room. Perhaps because mystery is more satisfying than finality. Or perhaps, most simply, because in the fog of war, the absence of a body, combined with a few whispers, can keep a ghost alive for generations. And Hitler's ghost, real or imagined, has never truly vanished. Chapter 4. FBI Files and South America Connections. But what did the world's most powerful intelligence agencies really believe? After the dust settled in Berlin, as the war closed its brutal final chapter, something troubling lingered. Officially, Adolf Hitler was dead. The bunker was sealed. His inner circle had spoken, but intelligence officers on both sides of the Atlantic were far from convinced. As early as May 1945, just days after Hitler's alleged suicide, the FBI began receiving tip-offs from civilians, military personnel, and even foreign governments. Each claimed the Führer had somehow escaped, and the Bureau took every single report seriously. According to the now declassified FBI vault, agents were ordered to follow up on all such leads. Why? Because, in the words of one internal memo, it was feared that Hitler may have escaped. The world could not afford to be wrong. Not again. And so began one of the most secretive, sprawling intelligence efforts of the post-war period. An open-ended hunt, not for a ghost, but for a man who had once brought the world to its knees. One of the earliest and most persistent threads took agents to Argentina, a country where, even during the war, whispers of Nazi influence had grown into a roar. In a CIA OSS memo dated July 1945, now public thanks to the Freedom of Information Act, a confidential source reported something extraordinary. The informant claimed that Hitler had arrived in Buenos Aires by submarine. then traveled to a remote hotel in the Sierras de Cordoba, run by known Nazi sympathizers. The place, La Falda, a quiet town nestled in Argentina's interior. The hotel, the Eden Hotel, once a luxury getaway, now allegedly a safe house for one of the most wanted men in history. The tip sounded like something from a pulp novel, but it wasn't ignored. Agents cross-checked names, reviewed travel logs, and quietly monitored known Nazi escapees in the region. One by one, leads evaporated. But the sheer number of similar reports kept the case alive. By the early 1950s, it was no longer a matter of speculation. Dozens of high-ranking Nazis had escaped to South America. Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust, had made it to Buenos Aires using false papers. Josef Mengele, the angel of death from Auschwitz, was reportedly living in Paraguay and Brazil, bouncing between farms and jungle towns. This network of escape routes became known as the Rat Lines. Sponsored quietly by elements within the Catholic Church, Red Cross, and various pro-fascist sympathizer groups, these rat lines helped Nazi officers flee Europe under new identities. So when theories emerged that Hitler had used the same system, it suddenly seemed less far-fetched. After all, if Eichmann could hide for 15 years, if Mengele could vanish for decades, why couldn't Hitler? Throughout the late 1940s and into the 1950s, the FBI compiled a growing dossier of rumors, sightings, and reports, most of them stemming from Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and Paraguay. Some were bizarre, others seemed oddly specific. One report described an older German man with a distinctive mustache seen shopping in Colonia Tovar, a secluded town in Venezuela founded by German settlers in the 1800s. Another described a man matching Hitler's appearance fishing in a small Chilean port village, always alone, always heavily armed. Perhaps the most provocative file was dated 1955. A letter intercepted by U.S. intelligence claimed Hitler had been seen alive in Bogota, Colombia, just months before. It described him as bald, frail, but still recognizable. All of these entries found their way into the FBI's ever-expanding Hitler file. Agents logged them, analysts reviewed them, but as the FBI later admitted bluntly, none of the rumors produced evidence. So if there was no proof, why keep the file open? One reason is protocol. Intelligence services are obligated to log, track, and investigate any lead that touches on national security or global threats. Even if the tip seems absurd, it must be recorded, analyzed, and either confirmed or dismissed. But another reason is the sheer uncertainty created by Soviet secrecy. Stalin never publicly confirmed Hitler's death. In fact, he hinted repeatedly that Hitler had escaped at one point, even telling U.S. Secretary of State James Burns that the Americans should be careful because Hitler is still alive. This Soviet disinformation, paired with the lack of a body, kept the idea alive in Western minds that Hitler might have survived. So the FBI did not dismiss the escape theory outright, not at first. Instead, they kept digging. During this same period, the U.S. government launched Operation Paperclip, a controversial program that brought hundreds of former Nazi scientists and engineers to work in American defense and space programs. This meant working relationships had been formed with individuals who had once served under Hitler. Some of those men, when questioned, refused to speak about the bunker. Others gave contradictory details about Hitler's last days. A few even hinted that it is not for us to say where he ended. These cryptic remarks did not escape FBI attention. But again, no hard proof ever surfaced. In 2014, after decades of public speculation, the FBI officially acknowledged the post-war search for Hitler. Their vault archive, now online, includes over 700 pages of declassified materials, ranging from field reports to anonymous letters. Among them is a clear conclusion. No credible evidence was ever found that Hitler survived. The files are real, but they reveal only that rumors were investigated, not validated. Historians like Guy Walters and Richard Evans have gone further. They note that the escaped narratives, especially those tied to Argentina, often mirror each other in suspiciously repetitive ways. The timing, the locations, even the supposed disguises, many echo wartime propaganda or later fictional accounts. Still, the very existence of these files and the fact they remained classified for decades has continued to fuel conspiracy theories. It is true that many of the eyewitness accounts cited by escape theorists are built on sand. Some were hoaxes, others were honest mistakes. Someone seeing a German tourist with a stern face and jumping to conclusions. But the broader question remains, why did so many believe it was possible? Perhaps because it felt too surreal that a man responsible for such global devastation could simply vanish with a gunshot behind closed doors. No trial, no photographs, no justice. The lack of closure, both visual and legal, opened a wound that never quite healed. In that vacuum, mystery thrived. The FBI and CIA chased ghosts. Writers published speculative books. And even now, decades later, the debate still flickers on message boards and late-night documentaries. In the end, the FBI's search in South America was not proof of survival, but proof of something else entirely, that when history leaves blanks, the world will race to fill them. Chapter 5, Forensics, DNA, and Debunking the Myths. In the sea of conspiracy theories, it was science that finally delivered the verdict. Between 2017 and 2018, a team of French forensic scientists, led by Philippe Charlier, was granted rare access to one of history's most contested artifacts, Adolf Hitler's remains held in Moscow. The infamous jawbone and dentures said to have been recovered by the Soviets in 1945. Their findings were decisive. The dental work on the charred remains, bridges, metal plates, and unique structures matched precisely with Hitler's dental records preserved by his longtime dental assistants. Charlier concluded with full scientific confidence, there is no possible doubt. This is Adolf Hitler. The forensic evidence aligned perfectly with the suicide account told by eyewitnesses from the Führer bunker. There were even bluish deposits found on the dentures, consistent with cyanide exposure, the very method Hitler was believed to have used alongside a gunshot. This wasn't the only test. For decades, escape theorists pointed to a skull fragment also kept in Moscow, claiming it to be Hitler's. But in 2009, American researchers conducted DNA analysis on the fragment. The result? It belonged to a woman aged under 40, not Hitler. That piece of evidence was invalidated, leaving the jawbone and dentures as the only verifiable remains. The forensic report, published in a peer-reviewed medical journal, didn't just support the suicide narrative, it crushed the decades of speculation. It confirmed what Allied investigators and bunker witnesses had already said: Hitler died in April 1945. Yet myths are hard to kill. Escape stories still circulate in books, documentaries, and YouTube videos, but none of those accounts can counter the hard facts. The jawbone does not lie. The Soviets may have created confusion, and intelligence services may have chased rumors, but the physical evidence has now spoken. In the end, science doesn't care about legends. It only cares about what can be proven. And in this case, Hitler's death has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So, did Hitler really escape? The evidence says no. Jawbone forensics, DNA tests, and expert analysis all confirm he died in 1945. The myths are compelling, but the facts are stronger. If you enjoyed this investigation, like the video, subscribe to our channel, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below.